$50,000. I need a husband tonight. The words rang across the small roadside diner like a dare no one expected to hear. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Coffee mugs hovered in midair. A few people chuckled nervously, thinking it had to be a joke. But the woman standing near the door wasn't joking. Olivia Whitmore, daughter of one of the most powerful CEOs in the state, looked nothing like someone used to asking for help. Her tailored coat still carried the polish of a Manhattan gala, her heels clicking sharply against the worn tile floor as if the room itself had offended her. The neon sign above the counter buzzed softly, casting a pale red glow across the diner's chrome stools and checkered floor. Outside, a cold Ohio wind pushed against the windows, rattling them just enough to make the silence feel heavier. Inside, every eye stayed on Olivia. $50,000, she repeated, slower this time, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. I need a husband. Tonight. Laughter rippled through the room now, louder and more confident, the kind of laughter people used when they believed they were watching someone else's meltdown. A trucker near the door whispered something under his breath and shook his head. A waitress behind the counter raised an eyebrow and kept pouring coffee like she had seen stranger things at 3 a.m. Olivia didn't laugh. She simply stood there, shoulders straight, chin lifted, like a woman refusing to break even when the world was watching her fall apart. Then, from the far end of the counter, a chair scraped quietly against the floor. The sound was small, but it cut through the laughter like a knife through paper. Daniel Carter stood up slowly. His jacket carried faint stains of motor oil. The sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms, hands rough from years of turning wrenches and lifting engines. Beside him sat a little girl with curly brown hair and a pink backpack resting against her chair. She looked up at him with calm, trusting eyes as if this moment was no stranger than any other evening they had shared. Daniel didn't rush. He simply set a few crumpled bills beside his untouched coffee, then glanced once toward Olivia. Not curious, not impressed, just steady. The room waited. Someone whispered, "Here we go." Olivia's eyes locked onto him immediately. Finally, someone moving toward her offer. $50,000 could change a lot for a man who looked like he had spent his life fixing other people's problems. She straightened slightly, ready to explain the terms, ready to close the deal. But Daniel didn't step closer to her. He stepped past her. The diner grew quiet again, the laughter fading like a radio losing signal. As he reached the door, Olivia spoke, her voice sharper now. "Wait." Daniel paused, but didn't turn around. "If you're walking away from $50,000, she said, you must already have something better." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Daniel finally turned his head slightly, just enough for his voice to carry across the room, calm and simple. "My daughter doesn't need a father who sells himself for money." The diner fell completely silent. And for the first time that night, Olivia Whitmore had no idea what to say. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as Daniel Carter pushed it open, and a cold Ohio wind slipped inside behind him. The parking lot smelled faintly of rain and diesel fuel from the trucks lined along the highway. Daniel stepped onto the cracked pavement while Lily followed close beside him, her small sneakers tapping lightly against the concrete. Behind them the diner remained strangely quiet, as if the words he had spoken were still hanging in the air. Inside, Olivia Whitmore had not moved. $50,000 had never failed her before. Money had solved problems, ended arguments, and convinced people to do things they would never normally consider. Yet the man who had just walked past her had not even hesitated. Outside, Daniel crouched slightly to zip Lily's pink backpack, his movements patient and unhurried. Lily looked up at him with the quiet wisdom children sometimes carried without realizing it. "Daddy," she asked softly, "why was that lady sad?" Daniel paused for a moment. The highway lights flickered across the windshield of his old pickup truck, a faded blue Ford that had seen better years but still ran strong. "Sometimes people have too many problems," he said gently, "and too much money does not always fix them." Lily thought about that and nodded slowly as if it made perfect sense. Just as Daniel opened the truck door, the diner bell rang again. The sound cut through the night air sharper this time. Olivia Whitmore stepped outside, her heels clicking across the pavement with determination. The wind tugged lightly at her long coat, but she barely noticed. "Wait," she called out. Daniel stopped, but did not turn immediately. Lily climbed into the passenger seat and buckled her seat belt the way she had been taught, giving the two adults a curious glance through the open window. Olivia walked closer, her expression no longer angry but focused, almost urgent. "I am not joking about the offer," she said. $50,000. I will pay you tonight if you help me." Daniel finally turned toward her. The neon lights from the diner sign reflected faintly in his calm eyes. "Help you with what exactly?" he asked. Olivia hesitated for the first time. The confidence that filled boardrooms and television interviews did not seem to fit in the quiet darkness of a roadside parking lot. "I need to get married before tomorrow afternoon," she said. Daniel raised one eyebrow slightly. "That sounds like a decision most people think about longer than 24 hours. She let out a breath that looked almost like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "My father announced my engagement tonight," she explained, "to a man I have met twice. If I do not marry someone else first, I lose control of the company my mother built before she died." Daniel studied her carefully now, not with suspicion, but with the steady attention of someone used to understanding problems before fixing them. "So you walked into a diner and offered strangers $50,000, he said. Olivia nodded once. "Yes," and everyone laughed. Daniel glanced toward the truck where Lily was quietly drawing shapes in the fog on the window glass. He looked back at Olivia again. "Marriage is not a tool," he said calmly. "It is supposed to mean something." Olivia met his eyes without blinking. "Right now it means survival." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The highway traffic hummed in the distance, and the diner sign buzzed above them like a tired electric insect. Then Lily leaned slightly out the window and looked at Olivia with gentle curiosity. "Are you lonely?" she asked. The question was so simple it seemed to stop the night itself. Olivia Whitmore had faced investors, reporters, and politicians without hesitation. But no one had asked her that before. And suddenly she did not know how to answer. Olivia Whitmore did not answer Lily immediately. The little girl's question hung in the cold night air, simple and honest in a way that adults rarely allowed themselves to be. Olivia stood there for a moment, the wind brushing lightly against her coat as the highway lights shimmered across the parking lot. For years she had been surrounded by people who asked about profits, strategies, and public appearances. No one had ever asked if she was lonely. Daniel watched her quietly, not rushing her, not judging. The calm patience in his eyes made the silence feel less uncomfortable and more like a moment that mattered. Finally Olivia spoke, her voice softer now. "Yes," she said slowly. "I suppose I am." Lily nodded thoughtfully as if she had just confirmed something she already suspected. "My teacher says people feel lonely when nobody listens to them," she said. Olivia almost smiled at that, though the expression faded quickly as reality returned. She turned her attention back to Daniel. "I know how this sounds," she said. "Walking into a diner and offering money for a husband sounds ridiculous. But I do not have much time." Daniel leaned lightly against the side of his truck, folding his arms. "Explain it clearly," he said. Olivia took a steady breath. "Tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon my father will finalize a contract that transfers voting control of Whitmore Holdings to a board alliance led by a man named Victor Langford." Daniel nodded slowly, recognizing the name from business headlines. "And he expects you to marry him." "Yes," Olivia replied. "My father believes merging families will protect the company from outside investors. What he really wants is control." Daniel studied her expression carefully. "And if you marry someone else first, then the agreement collapses," Olivia said. "My mother placed a clause in the company charter years ago. The primary heir must be legally married before any forced merger can be executed." Daniel let that sink in. "So this is about a contract loophole." "It is about saving what my mother built," Olivia corrected quietly. Daniel glanced again toward Lily, who was now drawing a small heart shape in the fog on the truck window with her finger. The little girl seemed perfectly calm, unaware that the adults around her were discussing corporate battles worth billions of dollars. $50,000 is a lot of money, Daniel said thoughtfully. But marriage is not paperwork you throw away when the deal ends. Olivia nodded once. "I know that. The agreement would only last 3 months. After that we file for an amicable divorce." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "You planned all of that already." "I plan everything," Olivia replied. "It is the only way I survived growing up in that world." The diner lights flickered behind them, and a semi-truck rumbled past on the highway like distant thunder. Daniel remained quiet for a moment longer, weighing her words with the careful patience of a man who had learned not to rush decisions. Lily suddenly leaned halfway out the open window again. If you get married, does that mean you will come to breakfast with us? She asked innocently. Olivia looked at her, surprised by the warmth in the child's voice. Sometimes, she said gently. Lily grinned. Then it sounds like you need help. Daniel sighed quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked from his daughter to the determined woman standing in the glow of the diner lights. Finally he spoke. I am not doing this for money, he said calmly. Olivia blinked in surprise. Then why would you even consider it? Daniel glanced at Lily again before answering. Because sometimes people deserve a second chance before the world decides their story for them. Daniel Carter did not speak right away after his words settled into the cold air. The highway hummed in the distance while the neon diner sign flickered above them like a tired heartbeat. Olivia Whitmore stood very still, studying him as if trying to solve a puzzle that money had never taught her to understand. Most men would have accepted the offer within seconds. $50,000 could fix mortgages, pay medical bills, buy years of comfort. Yet Daniel stood there as calm as if they were discussing the weather. Lily leaned her chin on the edge of the truck window and watched both of them carefully. Children often sense truths adults try to hide. Daddy always helps people, she said quietly. Daniel gave a small sigh and looked toward his daughter. That is not always a good habit, kiddo. Lily shrugged in the simple way children did when they believed kindness should never be complicated. Olivia glanced between them, the seriousness in her expression slowly shifting into something softer. I am not asking you to pretend forever, she said. 3 months. That is all the agreement requires. After that, everything goes back to your life and mine. Daniel nodded slowly, but did not move toward her yet. 3 months inside a world I do not belong in, he said calmly. Olivia crossed her arms, though the gesture no longer looked defensive. You might be surprised how many people in that world do not belong there either. The wind pushed a loose strand of her hair across her face, and for a moment, she looked less like a corporate heir and more like a woman who had been fighting alone for far too long. Daniel noticed the change. The polished confidence from earlier had faded into something more honest. Suppose I say yes, he said finally. What happens next? Olivia answered immediately, relief flashing briefly across her eyes. There is a courthouse about 20 miles from here that stays open late for emergency filings. My legal assistant can prepare the documents within an hour. Daniel tilted his head slightly. You already planned the entire operation. Olivia nodded once. I told you, planning is the only language my world respects. Lily suddenly pushed the truck door open and hopped down carefully onto the pavement. The cold air made her pull her sweater tighter around her shoulders as she walked a few small steps toward Olivia. The little girl studied her face with quiet curiosity. If you marry my dad, she said, does that mean you will eat pancakes with us sometimes? Olivia blinked, caught off guard again by the innocent question. Pancakes, she repeated softly. Every Saturday morning, Lily explained proudly. Daddy makes them with blueberries when the store has them. Daniel rubbed his forehead lightly, half amused and half embarrassed. Kiddo, this is not exactly how most marriage conversations go. But Olivia surprised him by smiling, a small real smile that had nothing to do with boardrooms or strategy. Pancakes sound nice, she admitted. The highway lights glowed across the quiet parking lot as the three of them stood there together. Daniel looked at Olivia again, this time more thoughtfully. He could see the exhaustion behind her determination, the kind that came from carrying responsibilities that never paused. Finally, he took a slow breath. I will help you stop the merger, he said calmly. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. But there are conditions. She straightened immediately. Name them. Daniel glanced down at Lily before answering. First, my daughter comes first in everything. No reporters, no chaos around her school, no turning her life into part of your business drama. Olivia nodded without hesitation. Agreed. Daniel continued. Second, when the 3 months are over, the divorce stays respectful and private. Lily does not lose another adult, she learns to trust. Olivia's voice softened. That is fair. Daniel looked toward the courthouse lights far down the highway, then back at Olivia Whitmore. The diner sign buzzed once more behind them, as if marking the moment. All right, he said quietly. Let us go save your company. The courthouse parking lot was almost empty when Daniel Carter's old pickup truck rolled slowly beneath the yellow streetlights. The building stood quiet and square against the dark Ohio sky, its brick walls carrying the tired dignity of a place that had witnessed thousands of ordinary lives changing in small legal sentences. Inside the truck, Lily sat in the middle seat between them, swinging her legs gently while humming a tune she had invented years earlier. Olivia Whitmore glanced at the faded dashboard and the worn steering wheel Daniel held with steady hands. This was not the kind of car she had ever imagined riding in on the night she would get married. But nothing about this night had followed the rules of her world. Daniel parked near the courthouse entrance and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than the road noise that had filled the last 20 minutes. Lily leaned forward curiously and peered at the tall courthouse doors. "Is this where people become husbands and wives?" she asked. "Sometimes," Daniel replied calmly. "Sometimes people just sign papers." Olivia opened her car door slowly, the cool night air brushing across her face as she stepped onto the pavement. A courthouse light glowed above the entrance, casting long shadows across the concrete steps. For the first time since she had run out of the gala hours earlier, she allowed herself to breathe without feeling the pressure of 100 eyes watching her. Daniel walked around the truck and opened Lily's door, lifting her gently down to the ground. She grabbed his hand automatically, her small fingers wrapping around his rough ones with easy trust. Olivia noticed that detail more than she expected. In her world, trust was negotiated. Here it seemed natural. Inside the courthouse lobby, fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead. The building smelled faintly of paper, polished floors, and the quiet seriousness of government offices that never quite slept. Behind a long wooden counter, a night clerk looked up from a stack of documents with mild curiosity. Olivia stepped forward first, her voice returning to the calm professionalism she used in corporate meetings. "We are here for an emergency marriage filing," she explained. The clerk glanced at Daniel's worn jacket and Lily's pink backpack before raising an eyebrow slightly. "That does not happen often after 9 in the evening," the clerk said. Olivia offered a small polite smile. "Tonight seems to be full of unusual decisions." The clerk shrugged gently and slid a set of forms across the counter. "Fill these out, and we will begin the process." Daniel picked up the pen slowly. The paperwork looked simple enough, but the meaning behind it felt heavier than ink on a page. Lily stood on tiptoe beside him, watching every movement with quiet fascination. "Daddy," she whispered, "does this mean Olivia will come to pancake mornings now?" Daniel looked down at the paper, then toward Olivia. Olivia hesitated before answering, but her voice carried a surprising warmth. "If your father agrees, I would like that very much." Lily grinned brightly, as if the entire complicated situation had suddenly become understandable. Daniel finished writing his name and slid the pen across the counter toward Olivia. For a brief second their hands almost touched over the paper. Outside the courthouse windows, the highway lights stretched across the dark horizon, silent witnesses to the strange beginning of a partnership neither of them had expected. The clerk gathered the documents and nodded toward a small hallway leading deeper into the building. "The judge on night duty will see you in a few minutes," the clerk said. Daniel glanced once more at Olivia Whitmore, the determined woman who had walked into a diner offering money for a husband only hours earlier. Then he looked at Lily holding both their hands as if the moment had always been meant to happen. The night was quiet, but something about it felt like the first page of a story neither of them had planned to write. The hallway outside the courtroom was quiet except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of papers being shuffled somewhere deeper in the courthouse. Daniel Carter sat on a wooden bench with Lily beside him, her small legs swinging back and forth while she traced shapes on the polished floor with the tip of her sneaker. Olivia Whitmore stood near the tall window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the empty parking lot where Daniel's old truck rested under a lonely streetlight. For years she had stood in rooms filled with executives and lawyers, negotiating deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet standing in a quiet courthouse hallway waiting to marry a man she had met only hours ago felt far more uncertain than any business negotiation she had ever faced. Lily suddenly leaned toward Daniel and whispered loudly enough for Olivia to hear. "Daddy, are you nervous?" Daniel smiled faintly and shook his head. "A little careful, maybe," he answered. "Nervous is what people feel when they do something they know is wrong." Olivia turned from the window and studied him thoughtfully. "You are surprisingly calm for someone about to marry a stranger," she said. Daniel rested his elbows on his knees and looked at her with steady eyes. "I am not marrying a stranger," he replied. "I am helping someone who asked for help. That is different." Olivia did not answer right away. The simplicity of his explanation made the situation feel strangely grounded. Before she could respond, the courtroom door opened quietly, and a gray-haired clerk stepped into the hallway. "The judge will see you now," the clerk said politely. Daniel stood first and reached for Lily's hand. Olivia followed them inside the small courtroom where soft yellow lights illuminated rows of empty wooden seats. At the front of the room, an older judge sat behind a polished desk, reading through the paperwork the clerk had handed him. He looked up slowly over his glasses and studied the three of them with calm curiosity. "Late evening marriage requests usually come with unusual stories," the judge said in a gentle voice. Daniel and Olivia exchanged a brief glance. "That sounds about right," Daniel replied calmly. The judge nodded once and looked down at the papers again. "Olivia Whitmore and Daniel Carter," he read. The judge paused for a moment before looking up again. "You both understand that marriage is a legal commitment, not simply a temporary arrangement." Olivia held his gaze respectfully. "Yes, Your Honor." Daniel nodded as well. "We understand." The judge studied their expressions for a moment longer, as if measuring the quiet honesty in Daniel's voice and the determined resolve in Olivia's. Finally, he closed the file and gestured for them to step forward. Lily squeezed Daniel's hand tightly, but looked excited rather than confused. "Daniel Carter," the judge said, "do you willingly enter into this marriage with Olivia Whitmore?" Daniel glanced briefly at Olivia before answering. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." The judge turned to Olivia. "Olivia Whitmore, do you willingly enter into this marriage with Daniel Carter?" Olivia felt a strange calm settle over her as she looked at the man beside her. Only a few hours earlier, he had been a stranger drinking coffee in a roadside diner. Yet something about his quiet steadiness made the moment feel less like desperation and more like the beginning of something unexpected. "Yes, Your Honor," she answered clearly. The judge nodded once more, then signed the final document with a smooth motion of his pen. "In that case," he said warmly, "I pronounce you husband and wife." Lily's eyes widened with excitement as she tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered happily, "does this mean pancake mornings are official now?" Daniel laughed softly under his breath, while Olivia felt the smallest hint of relief begin to replace the storm of pressure that had followed her all evening. Outside the courthouse windows, the Ohio night remained quiet and still, unaware that inside a small courtroom a mechanic, a billionaire's daughter, and a curious little girl had just changed the course of three very different lives. The courthouse hallway felt quieter after the judge's words settled into the air. Husband and wife. The phrase sounded simple, almost ordinary, yet it carried a strange weight neither Daniel Carter nor Olivia Whitmore had expected when the evening began. Lily walked between them proudly, holding one hand from each of them as if the arrangement had existed her entire life. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above while the clerk gathered the final documents and slid them into a neat folder. Olivia accepted the folder slowly, her eyes scanning the printed words that now legally connected her name with Daniel's. For a moment she simply stared at the page, as if trying to understand how a decision made in a roadside diner had become official law in less than 3 hours. Daniel noticed the quiet tension in her posture. "First time signing something that serious without a boardroom full of lawyers," he said gently. Olivia looked up and almost laughed, though the sound carried more relief than humor. "You would be surprised how many signatures in my world mean less than this one." Lily tugged lightly on Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, does this mean we are a team now?" Daniel looked down at her bright, curious face and nodded slowly. "I suppose it does, kiddo." Olivia felt something unexpected shift inside her when she heard those words. Team. In her life, partnerships were calculated arrangements designed to strengthen influence or increase profits. Yet standing in the quiet courthouse hallway with a mechanic and his daughter, the words suddenly felt genuine. Outside the courthouse doors, the night air had grown colder, and a thin layer of mist hovered over the empty parking lot. Daniel unlocked the truck and helped Lily climb into the middle seat again before turning toward Olivia. "Your hotel is probably across town," he said. "I can drive you there." Olivia shook her head slightly. "I canceled it earlier tonight. I assumed the evening would end very differently." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Then where exactly were you planning to sleep?" Olivia hesitated before answering honestly. "I had not thought that far ahead." Lily leaned forward immediately from the truck seat. "She can stay with us," she said with cheerful certainty. Daniel gave his daughter a patient look. Life decisions are usually discussed before invitations are announced. But Olivia surprised them both again. Your daughter may be the most practical person in this conversation, she said softly. Daniel rested one hand on the truck door while considering the situation. His small house was nothing like the luxury homes Olivia Whitmore had grown up in. Yet leaving her alone somewhere unfamiliar did not sit right with him either. It is not fancy, he said finally. Olivia followed his gaze toward the worn pickup truck and then toward the quiet highway stretching into darkness. After tonight, fancy does not seem very important, she replied. Daniel nodded once and climbed into the driver's seat while Olivia settled carefully into the passenger side. The engine started with a low familiar rumble as the truck rolled slowly out of the courthouse parking lot. Lily leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder from the middle seat and yawned softly. Are we still making pancakes tomorrow morning? She asked sleepily. Daniel glanced toward Olivia for a brief moment before answering. I think tomorrow morning we will keep things simple. Olivia watched the dark highway unfold ahead of them while the courthouse lights faded behind the truck. For the first time in years, the future in front of her was not a strategy written on paper. It was uncertain, unplanned, and strangely peaceful. The pickup truck rolled quietly along the empty highway as the courthouse lights disappeared behind them. The dashboard clock glowed softly, showing a few minutes past 10 in the evening. Lily had already fallen asleep, her head resting gently against Daniel's shoulder while her small hand still loosely held the sleeve of his jacket. The peaceful rhythm of the road seemed to settle over the truck like a blanket. Olivia Whitmore sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the dark fields slide past under the pale glow of the headlights. For most of her life, she had traveled in black luxury cars driven by chauffeurs who spoke only when necessary. Tonight she sat in an old pickup truck that rattled slightly over every crack in the pavement. Yet the quiet simplicity of the moment felt strangely calming. Daniel kept both hands steady on the wheel, his eyes focused on the road ahead. You are quiet, he said after a while. Olivia looked over at him thoughtfully. I am thinking about how unusual tonight has been. Daniel gave a small nod. That makes two of us. Olivia glanced toward Lily sleeping peacefully between them. She trusts you completely, Olivia said softly. Daniel's expression softened as he glanced at his daughter for a brief moment before returning his attention to the road. Children do that when they know you will always come back for them. Olivia felt a quiet ache behind that sentence, though Daniel had spoken it gently. She realized she knew almost nothing about the life this man had lived before tonight. The highway sign ahead announced the next exit for a small town a few miles away. Daniel slowed the truck and turned onto a quieter road lined with modest houses and tall maple trees. After a few more turns, he pulled into the driveway of a small white house with a wooden porch and a single porch light glowing warmly above the door. It was not large or impressive, but it felt lived in, the kind of place where laughter had echoed through the rooms for years. Daniel carefully turned off the engine so Lily would not wake too suddenly. He gently lifted her into his arms and carried her toward the front door, while Olivia followed quietly behind him. Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee. The living room held a worn couch, a small bookshelf filled with children's stories, and a drawing taped proudly to the wall that showed a smiling stick-figure family under a bright yellow sun. Daniel carried Lily to a small bedroom at the end of the hallway and tucked her under a quilt patterned with blue stars. She stirred slightly, but did not wake. After closing the bedroom door quietly, Daniel returned to the living room, where Olivia stood near the bookshelf studying the drawing on the wall. Lily made that one last year, Daniel explained gently. Olivia looked at the picture again. The drawing showed 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a crooked house and a bright sun. There was a space beside them that had been filled in with a new figure drawn in purple crayon. Olivia pointed to it quietly. That one looks recent. Daniel nodded slowly. She added that tonight, while we were waiting in the courthouse hallway. Olivia felt a surprising warmth rise in her chest as she studied the small purple figure standing beside the others. Daniel walked toward the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water before handing one to her. Tomorrow will be busy, he said calmly. The board meeting is at 2 o'clock, correct? Olivia nodded. Yes. Victor Langford and my father expect to finalize the merger agreement then. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, completely calm. Good. Olivia looked at him with quiet curiosity. You sound confident for someone who has never attended a corporate board meeting. Daniel gave a small, thoughtful smile. You would be surprised what I used to do before fixing cars for a living. Olivia raised an eyebrow slightly. For the first time that evening, she realized there might be more to Daniel Carter's story than a mechanic who happened to help a stranger in a diner. Morning sunlight slipped through the kitchen window and painted soft golden lines across the wooden table. The smell of fresh coffee and warm blueberries filled the small house, while a frying pan sizzled quietly on the stove. Daniel Carter moved with calm familiarity in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with the kind of patience that came from years of simple routines. Lily sat at the table swinging her legs, while watching every move like it was a magic trick. Olivia Whitmore stood near the doorway for a moment, taking in the quiet scene. She had spent years waking up in penthouses overlooking Manhattan, surrounded by polished glass walls and silent staff moving through marble hallways. Yet this modest kitchen with a scratched wooden floor and the smell of homemade breakfast felt warmer than any place she had lived in a decade. Lily noticed her first and waved excitedly. "Good morning, Olivia. Pancakes are ready." Olivia smiled and walked to the table, still slightly unsure how to behave in a home where nothing felt rehearsed. Daniel placed a plate in front of her with 2 blueberry pancakes and a small dish of maple syrup. "Breakfast before boardroom battles," he said calmly. Olivia looked down at the plate and shook her head in disbelief. 12 hours ago, I was standing in a ballroom surrounded by investors. Now I am eating pancakes in a mechanic's kitchen before a corporate takeover meeting. Life changes fast, Daniel replied quietly. Lily poured a small glass of orange juice and slid it toward Olivia with careful concentration. "You need energy for big meetings," she said seriously. Olivia laughed softly, accepting the glass. "Thank you." After breakfast, Daniel rinsed the dishes while Olivia checked her phone for the first time that morning. Messages had flooded in overnight. Board members, reporters, and legal advisors were all asking the same question about the emergency marriage filing that had appeared in public records before sunrise. She placed the phone down slowly. "The news has already spread," she said. Daniel dried his hands on a towel. "Good. That means the merger cannot move forward without legal challenges." Olivia studied him carefully again. "You talk like someone who understands corporate strategy." Daniel leaned against the counter calmly. "Before I started fixing engines, I spent 10 years designing aerospace systems for a defense contractor in Houston." Olivia blinked in surprise. "You were an engineer." Daniel nodded. "My wife and I moved here after Lily was born. When my wife passed away, I left that world. I needed a quieter life." Olivia absorbed the information slowly. The man who had quietly agreed to help her the night before was far more capable than she had realized. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked toward noon. The board meeting would begin in less than 2 hours. Daniel picked up his keys and looked toward Olivia with steady calm. "Ready to face your father and his investors?" Olivia stood and nodded, though the nervous tension from the previous day had faded into something stronger. "Yes." Lily ran over and hugged both of them quickly before stepping back proudly. "Remember," she said with complete confidence, "teams always win when they work together." Daniel opened the front door and the bright Ohio afternoon poured into the small house. Outside, the road stretched toward the city where the boardroom waited. Olivia paused for a moment on the porch and looked back at the small purple stick figure Lily had drawn on the refrigerator with a magnet. For the first time since the crisis had begun, she felt something she had not expected to find in the middle of chaos. She felt ready.